Well, good morning to all of you. It's good to see you. God's blessing on our day today. It is Friday, July 10th, and I'm so excited to be with you here on our Bible study. And nice way to close out the week. Wonderful week for me. I was driving back from Chicago early in the week and then got to spend some time with you. Whenever you take a vacation, you always pay for it, right? So just been one of those crazy, crazy, crazy weeks. But I'm anxious to get to Friday. If you're joining us this morning, go ahead and say hello and welcome to you. Interesting thing happened. We do our staff meetings virtually. In other words, we all call into a Zoom call to talk about, different things. And it was pointed out to me, I don't really read the national news a whole lot, mostly because I just get, it just gets me, I don't know. I just don't do that. So it was pointed out to me that we are the number one place in the world for coronavirus. And I was just shocked by this because I don't know how I missed this. And so because the news feeds that I like to look at the Arizona Daily Star, sometimes the Arizona Republic, but I guess I'm more of a local news guy. But come to find out that they said, yeah, according to the New York Times, we're number one. So I had to look into this. So I went to the New York Times website, and sure enough, I'll just even show you here. Oh, that's not it. Let's try this. U.S. Sunbelt is the worst in any country. There's no country in the world where confirmed coronavirus cases are growing as rapidly as they are in Arizona, Florida, or South Carolina, which I thought, wow. And if you look at the data here, Arizona is number one with 3.3 thousand cases per million residents on the last 7 days. And then Florida is 2.7, South Carolina is 2.3. And then across the world, Bahrain, I guess, is number 4. But Arizona shows up as number 1. And that is a scary thing, folks. Until you actually start to look at it, let's just look at. So the place I go for looking at data like this is the Arizona Department of Health Services. Let's just look at their website. If I can pull it up here. It says that the number of deaths is 75 reported today. And if you go to the world meter, we see 75 deaths was yesterday in Arizona. So this is, if you look at now, you only get the stuff that's been reported to date. But if you look at yesterday, that's everybody reporting the daily deaths. And if you look on the world meter, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Let's sort it by new deaths. So we're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're fifth highest in new deaths. This isn't deaths per population. It's just if you look at deaths per population, deaths per million population, but it doesn't do new deaths per population. That chart isn't here. Anyway, so we're just going to go back to Arizona Department of Health Services. So that's 75 again. Remember we showed you 75. Number of new tests reported today, fatalities. But if we look at COVID-19 deaths, so this is Arizona Department of Health Services, COVID-19 deaths. There again is a 75 reported on World Meter. But if you look, the deaths are going up and up and up and up. But now they're starting to, it appears to me, and this is just my opinion, it appears to me that the deaths are coming down. And if we know how this, how COVID, first of all, you get infected, and then it seems to be maybe 2 weeks from infection to where you can start to get really serious symptoms, and you're hospitalized if it's that bad. And then once you're hospitalized, there's a little bit of a time where they might put you on an intubator. They might put you in an emergency room. So really the infections of the people that are dying now probably happened a month ago, maybe 6 weeks to 4 to 6 weeks ago. So the fact that we're now seeing less deaths means that the 6 weeks ago stuff is what's doing this. And if what happened 6 weeks ago in Arizona, at least, was that everything was off of lockdown. I mean, we were pretty much free to do a lot of things in Arizona. Now we have another lockdown. It'll be interesting to see how much these deaths go down after that. But I'm encouraged. I just wanted to say that I'm encouraged by the fact that this chart that shows deaths, it looks like it peaked about June 25th, which was 2 weeks ago. And it looks like it's just been steadily coming down since then. The other thing that people are concerned about is hospitalization and bed usage availability. Well, that's on this chart too. If you look, this is how many people are in intensive care unit beds in Arizona hospitals, and we are at maybe 89% capacity. So we have 11% capacity more than that. And if you go to emergency room department beds available, we're about 50%. So there's 50% of, even more than 50% emergency room beds available. And inpatient beds, these are people that have been admitted, they're out of the emergency room. They're at about, there's about 13% room left, or we're at about 87%. And so it looks high, but I understand that most hospitals, to be profitable, they try to keep that rate up there into the 70, 80, 90%. So it looks like as of today, there's capacity available in the beds. Let's look at ventilator use. That's another interesting chart, because we were told we were going to run out of ventilators. Well, they manufactured a whole bunch across the United States, and as of right now, we have plenty of ventilator capacity available. So as I look at this, hospital bed capacity looks pretty decent. Ventilators looks pretty decent. Hospital COVID-19 specific metrics. Let's look at that. I don't know what that one is. So this one shows inpatient COVID-19 that we have right now 3,437 people who are inpatient in the hospital with, so it's roughly 3,500 people that have been diagnosed as COVID, and ventilators. Of that 3,500, 575 of them are on ventilators. And about 861 are in the ICU, intensive care. So, I mean, these numbers, and even those look like they're kind of leveling off a little bit. What is inpatient? Is that leveling off? It's too early to say. It's going up. So, I'm encouraged that we've got the capacity there. I'm encouraged that the deaths is going down. We will not know, unfortunately. Everybody's comparing country against country, county against county, and all that. Arizona, it just means that maybe that our surge is happening right now, but every place in the world is going to have a surge and the peak on the surge. And it appears to me like we may have already had our surge, and maybe we're coming down. Maybe we're looking at a secondary surge right now. But we like these surges because once you get the surge, then you kind of get that herd immunity. And that really is an exciting thing. So the bottom line in all this is just keep yourself safe. I'm encouraged that it seems like what we've done over the last month to 2 months, social distancing, wearing masks, limiting your going outside, for whatever reason, that has brought the deaths down dramatically. And I'm very, very encouraged by that. So we'll just have to see kind of where this all goes. I know that Governor Ducey had an announcement yesterday that said he was going to not lock down Pima County. I thought that was very encouraging. If he was going to lock down the county, then we would have to rethink our communion at the end of the month. But he didn't, so I feel pretty comfortable that that's a good path forward. Again, whatever I do or whatever our church does, you do what you feel is best for you. And if you feel what is best and safest for you is to kind of limit your exposure, I perfectly accept that decision. I applaud that decision. And my promise to you is I'm going to try to do whatever I can to make our online stuff as available as possible and as high quality as possible, and to help you to grow in your faith. A couple things we're going to be doing is at the end of the month, we're also going to have another Community Sunday. That one is exciting so that we can join each other and see each other, and that will be a really, really great thing. I hope you enjoy that. So keep your eyes posted for that. So we're going to do communion on the 19th. We're going to have a Community Sunday on the 26th. And then we're into August. And, August brings a whole new month with a whole bunch of new challenges. But we will get through this. We will absolutely get through this. I remember talking to somebody who was older that said, I just want to spend my last years, in this. And we're all of us are going to get whatever length of time. Let's say this is 6 months. We're all going to get 6 months of our life, taken away from us from this. Whether or not you're 15 years old or 25 or 35 or 75 or 95, we all, we're all impacted by this fairly equally. The only people that aren't impacted by this are the people that are not alive during this coronavirus. But we're all getting 6 months or whatever taken off of our socializing and that sort of thing, which is unfortunate. But, I encourage you to use this time to grow in your faith, to grow in your relationship with God, to reach out to people and communicate with them as well as you can under the circumstances. And it is a crazy time, and it'll be something that I can, hopefully tell my grandchild or my great-grandchild, yeah, I was, alive during the coronavirus, 2000. Not sure that's all the greatest thing in the world, but it's what it is. So we are in Genesis, and we have been in Genesis. I think we're in part 39, maybe 40, and we're only in chapter 12 or 15. So we're not going very rapidly through Genesis, and I'm sorry. But when we went through Matthew, there was 28 chapters of Matthew, so I had 28 days of Matthew, and that just seemed way too fast. So I really wanted to just pause and casually go through Genesis without, pressure to finish it in any realistic time frame. I remember there was a guy named Ron Harmon at my church back in Phoenix, and he would, I think he started the book of John, and it took him 30 years to get through the book of John or something. I don't remember. Anyway, but everybody takes their own pace, and the slower pace you go, I believe the more blessed you are in really digging deep into some of this stuff. So if you think I'm going too fast or too slow, let me know. Put it in the comments section or send me an email. But otherwise, we're going to go at the pace that I want to go. So, and I'm in charge. So there you go. Anyway, we are in Genesis 15. Just to give you a little brief update. Abraham goes and rescues his nephew Lot. And then he comes back. Melchizedek, who's this priest king, comes and blesses Abraham. That's where we left everything. We spent a little bit of time on Melchizedek. We are now in Genesis 15. Let's just take a look and read. After this, the word of the Lord came to Abraham in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward. But Abram said, Sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless, and the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus? And Abram said, You have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir. Then the word of the Lord came to him, This man will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir. He took him outside and he said, Look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. And then he said to him, So shall your offspring be. Abram believed the Lord, and it credited it to him as righteousness. So this is a covenant with Abraham. This is God's promise to Abraham. If you'll remember, this isn't the first one. The first one was actually back in Genesis 12. I guess we could probably even look at that. The Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great. You'll be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. All the peoples on earth will be blessed through you." So, now nowhere in Genesis 12 does God make a promise to Abram that he will have sons or daughters or any offspring, right? He just says that I'm going to bless you. I'm going to make you a great nation, and you will bless the world through that. And if we look at this whole story of Lot, Abram was able to command 318 men out of his tribe to go and rescue Lot. So Abram is not just this flash-in-the-pan little guy. I mean, already he is, in my opinion, a great nation. Already, in my opinion, God has blessed him tremendously. If I were Abram and I had 318 men, not including women and children, probably in fighting age condition, in my tribe, and I was like the leader of that tribe, I would feel that I was a pretty great nation. Now, maybe it's not attached to property, but it's a great people. Now, even if you don't have any children, it's a great people. I will make your name great. You'll be a blessing. I mean, I think Abram could have been, great. But as we know, there is something about having offspring that is, Abram notices it, that there's something about being, having all this wealth and all this command of all these people, but there's no offspring. There's no way that I'm going to take who I am and pass it along to somebody in my bloodline. It's going to go to somebody outside of my bloodline, this Eliezer guy. And Abram notices or tells God, but I don't have offspring. It is one thing to be a great people and a great tribe with offspring, and that is totally different to being a great nation, great tribe without offspring and without land. One of the things that really would make Abram a great nation is if there's a nation to remember him by, because without offspring and without land tied to it, who's going to propagate the story of Abram? You almost need the offspring to tell the story, right? You need the offspring to say it's in the room where it happened. That's a little quote from Hamilton, the musical. Because somebody has to carry that forward. And Abram pleads with God. He says, I don't have any offspring. He says, you have given me no children, so a servant in my house will be my heir. And God heard Abram. Maybe God already knew about Abram. Now, you'll have to remember, how old is Abram? Well, when God, back in Genesis 12, when he made this promise to Abram, that you'd be a great nation, Abram was 75 years old at that point. Since that time, Abram traveled out of the land of Ur. He built 2 altars. He got into a famine situation, so he went to Egypt, where he lived for a while and was, highly respected in Egypt. And then the Pharaoh found out that this lady wasn't really Abram's sister, but was actually Abram's wife. So he doesn't kill Abram. He lets Abram leave. So Abram is somewhere older than 75 years old at this point. And that, to me, is a blessing. To be able to do all this at 75 is a huge blessing. But he has no children. He has no heirs, and it's no blood. My own flesh and blood won't be my heir. But God says to him this. He says, this man will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir. And then he takes Abram outside and he says, just look at the stars. You will have more heirs and more descendants than the stars in the sky. And how many stars are in the Milky Way galaxy is 61 billion stars. And can you count them all? You can't see them all at the same time. But if you just look at our Milky Way galaxy, 61 billion stars in the Milky Way galaxy. Of course, how many galaxies are there? I think there's as many galaxies as there are stars in the Milky Way galaxy. I think there's billions of galaxies and billions of stars in each galaxy. I mean, of course, he could have just been talking about the Milky Way, but just the vastness of space. I think we talked about this. If you want to really have a deep dive into that, go back into the creation story, the first few episodes of Genesis, and we talk about how vast creation is. But the Lord promises Abram that he will have sons. Now, God will keep a promise. God doesn't need anything to keep a promise. But God continues with Abram. He says, now do this. He says, let's look at it. Verse 7. Then he also said to him, I am the Lord, who brought you out of Ur the Chaldeans to give you this land and take possession of it. But Abram said, Sovereign Lord, how can I know that I will gain possession of it? So the Lord said to him, Bring me a heifer, a goat, and a ram, each 3 years old, along with a dove and a young pigeon. And Abram brought all these to him. He cut them in two and arranged the halves opposite each other. The birds, however, he did not cut in half. Then birds of prey came down on the carcasses, but Abram drove them away. So, two things here. First of all, God gives him a covenant of land. He says, I will give you he said, I'm going to give you this great land. He goes, well, how am I going to take possession of it? How am I going to have offspring? How am I going to have land? And the Lord says, well, we're going to do something strange here, but you're going to bring to me a heifer, a goat, and a ram, and you're going to cut it in half. And so Abram takes and he cuts each of these, the goat, heifer, and ram, in half, and he puts half on one side and half on the other side, and he kind of makes a path with these disgustingly cut up animals, right? And the birds come and want to feast on it. Abram's like, no, you're not going to feast on this. And he doesn't cut up the birds of prey, but he cuts up the heifer, the goat, and the ram. And then what happens? Then we get this story. Let's look back at here. Genesis. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. Hold on. Let me look here. Where am I? Yeah, here we go. Then we have verse 12. As the sun was setting, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and a thick and dreadful darkness came over him. Then the Lord said to him, Know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and that they will be enslaved and mistreated there. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterwards they will come out with great possessions. You, however, will go to your ancestors in peace and be buried at a good old age. In the 4th generation your descendants will come back here, for the sins of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure. When the sun had set and darkness had fallen, a smoking firepot with a blazing torch appeared and passed between the pieces. And on that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram and said, To your descendants I give this land from the Wadi of Egypt to the great river of the Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, Kenizzites, Cadmonites, Hittites, Perizzites, Rephaites, Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, and Jebusites. And that basically is the end of that covenant. So Abram falls into a deep sleep, and this torch, this lighted torch, comes. And on that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram. Now, that word made a covenant is actually the Lord cut a covenant with Abram. The word to make is actually cut. He cut a covenant. And that word is used in Hebrew to say to make, make a covenant. But it comes from the fact that Abram cut these pieces and moved them up. And then this torch goes through the pieces. And that's God's indication to Abram that he will keep the covenant, that this is a solemn thing. Now, the interesting thing is if the Lord says he's going to do something, is the Lord going to do it? Absolutely. The Lord didn't do all this stuff back in Genesis 12. Did the Lord keep his promise? Absolutely. So this whole cutting of the animals and the torch and all that, it wasn't for God. It was a sign for Abram. It was something that Abram looked at and visualized and smelled and saw and participated in to remind Abram of this time when God made a promise to him, when he made a covenant to him. It's not for God, it's for Abram. Because when God says he's going to do something, God is going to do it. He's going to fulfill that promise. But we as humans need signs and markers and smells and sounds and flesh, and we need things in our life that are markers in our life to help us remember the promises of God. And what's interesting is that, we have 5 senses. We have sight, we have smell, we have touch, we have taste, we have hearing. And all of that stuff is in play here, right? I don't know about taste, maybe not taste, but the smell of it was in play. The sight of it was in play. The hearing of it, as you kill the lamb and the goat and the heifer, the touching of the pieces and all that. I mean, all of that came into play to remind Abram of this sacred moment. I think it was Andy Warhol. Every time Andy Warhol was a artist from the 60s, if probably all you know that. If you're watching this years from now, Andy Warhol was an artist in the 60s, and every time he would have a new artwork, he would want something to remember that artwork. He remembered at one point that the sense of smell, is the most powerful thing in the human body. It's the one thing that can bring you back. If you have ever had a grandmother or a mom that wore a certain perfume and you smell that, you're immediately drawn back to grandma or mom because of that perfume, right? Old Spice. Whenever I smell Old Spice aftershave, I'm reminded of my dad because he's still alive, but he doesn't actually wear Old Spice anymore when I'm with him now. But when we were growing up as kids, he'd always put that Old Spice on and walk out the door, and I would remind myself. So whenever I smell Old Spice, it reminds me of my dad. So there are things in our life that help us remember, and God wanted Abram to remember this covenant, and so he does this weird thing. He has him take the pieces and cut them, and then all the smells and the touch and the taste and the hearing and all that, all the senses activated for Abram so that he would remember this. So it will be transferred from the left side of the brain to the right side of the brain, back to the left side of the brain, that it would be sealed in his body, that he would remember this. And he does. He does remember it. And does God remember the covenant? Does God give the land that he points out to Abram? And the answer is yes, he does. Because Moses, who's writing this, brings the people to the precipice of the promised land. And they eventually do take over the promised land. And the Jews today are still in the promised land. The people, the descendants of Abram, are all in the promised land. I mean, it's all Abram's descendants, all through here. And God kept his promise to Abram. And the number of descendants that Abram has, if we look today, you can't, his number is the stars. So God, and growing, because the Christian church is the descendant also of Abram. The lineage of Christ goes back to Abram. Abram goes to Christ. Christ becomes the perfect sacrifice, the perfect image of the family of Abraham. And we are all children of Abraham through Jesus. So yes, there are many, many, many people. God fulfills this promise to Abraham. Because when God ever makes a promise, he fulfills it. And we as humans, because we're sinful, we need signs, we need things to show that, God's promises are true. Ergo baptism, ergo communion. I mean, all these things are also reminders to us of God's promise. They're more than that, but they're also reminders to us of that. So I think we'll probably leave it there. That's Genesis 15, and let you go and have a wonderful weekend. I pray that you have an awesome weekend. Just so you know, for me, I'm doing 2 funerals this weekend. Both of them COVID deaths. So they're very, very small affairs. We're not publicizing them. They're big. They're not really in our congregation per se. They're associated with our congregation. I do that periodically. So I guess we'll have worship on Sunday, and then we will have again, we'll get back together in Genesis 16 on Monday morning. So thanks for joining with me, and pray God's richest blessings on the rest of your day and on your weekend, and let's close in prayer. Gracious God, thank you for every promise you've given us, because you've fulfilled and honored every promise that you've given us. And whenever you say something, you mean it and you fulfill it, because you are unchanging. And the greatest promise is that you said that we will be with you forever and that we're in your kingdom because of your Son. And for that, we thank you, and it's in his name we pray. Amen. All right. So again, thanks for joining me, and have a wonderful day. We will see you Monday. Take care. Bye.